She flirted all night, then pointed me to the door. So I used it. She laughed. While she was building an empire with another man, using my money, my business, my trust, I was building something she never saw coming. She wanted me gone. I made sure she regretted that wish. My name is Connor Fontaine. I'm 47 years old, and I used to think I had it figured out. I run a mid-sized logistics and supply chain company out of Charlotte, North Carolina. 15 years of grinding, building client by client, deal by deal. We're not Wall Street, but we're solid. The kind of business that doesn't make headlines, but keeps the world moving. I married Jolene 11 years ago. She was sharp, funny, ambitious in a way that felt electric back then. She built her own lifestyle brand, curated home goods, interior styling, a social media presence that grew faster than either of us expected. By last year, she had 800,000 followers and a sponsorship calendar that looked like a Fortune 500 quarterly report. I was proud of her. I want to make that clear before everything else. I genuinely was. But somewhere along the way, the woman I married started treating our marriage like a backdrop, something tasteful to photograph in front of, then step away from. I noticed it first in small things. She'd be on her phone at dinner, laughing at something on her screen, and when I asked what was funny, she'd just say, "Oh, nothing, just work stuff." She stopped asking about my day, stopped reaching for my hand in the car. The warmth didn't disappear all at once. It just drained out slowly like water from a tub you forgot to plug. Reed Voss entered the picture about 14 months ago. He was a so-called brand strategist. Late 30s, good jawline, the kind of guy who used words like synergy and narrative arc in casual conversation. Jolene brought him on to help expand her platform. I shook his hand at a dinner party, thought nothing of it. He had that smooth, rehearsed energy that some men wear like a suit. I should have trusted my gut that night. The evening it all broke open was a charity gala at the Harrington Club, one of Charlotte's old money venues, all dark wood paneling and crystal chandeliers. Jolene had pushed hard for us to attend. Big room, big names, good exposure for her brand. I wore my navy suit. She wore a deep burgundy dress that turned heads the moment we walked in. For about 20 minutes, we were a couple. She looped her arm through mine, smiled for photos, whispered something in my ear about the appetizers being terrible. I laughed. It felt, briefly, like us again. Then Reed Voss walked in. I watched the shift happen in real time. Jolene's posture changed. She straightened, brightened, her whole body orienting toward him like a compass finding north. She excused herself to say hello. That was fine. Professional. Normal. Except she didn't come back. For the next hour, I stood at the edge of the room holding 2 glasses of sparkling water, watching my wife laugh with another man the way she used to laugh with me. Her hand rested on his forearm. Her head tilted close when he spoke. At one point, he said something low and private, and she pressed her fingers to her lips, delighted, her eyes cutting briefly to me across the room. Not with guilt, but with something almost like dismissal. I set one of the glasses down and walked over. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice easy. "Thought you might want this." Jolene took the glass without quite looking at me. "Reed was just telling me about the Milan trip. We're thinking of doing a whole content series around it." I nodded at Reed. He gave me the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. I tried to join the conversation twice. Both times, I was talked over, not aggressively, just efficiently. I was being managed. Finally, I touched Jolene's elbow. "Maybe we should think about heading out soon. Chloe's got an early morning." She turned then, fully, and looked at me the way you look at a slow driver in the left lane. "Connor." Her voice was smooth as polished marble. "If you're uncomfortable, the door's right there." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Reed looked away. A couple nearby suddenly found their drinks very interesting. I felt heat rise up the back of my neck. But underneath it, something else was already moving. Something cold and quiet, pulling back from the shore. She didn't think I'd walk through it. That much was obvious. But I set my glass on a passing tray, straightened my jacket, and without another word, I turned and walked toward that door. Past the cameras, past the brittle smiles, out into the cool November air. As the valet brought my car around, I sat behind the wheel for a long moment and didn't move. The city hummed around me. In the silence, I found something I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Clarity. On the drive home, I stopped in Chloe's room. She was asleep, one arm flung over her stuffed elephant, her breath soft and even. I stood there in the dark for a full minute, just watching her, grounding myself in the one thing in my life that was still completely real. Then I went to our bedroom, opened the top drawer of my nightstand, and found it almost by accident. A folded note, edges worn soft with age. I recognized the handwriting before I even opened it. Jolene's, from maybe 9 years back. You made me feel safe, Connor. Like the world can throw whatever it wants, and I don't have to be scared. I hope you know that. I folded it carefully and set it back in the drawer. Downstairs, I heard her key in the lock. Jolene came home at 11:40. I heard the garage door, the click of her heels on the kitchen tile, the soft thud of her clutch on the counter. I was in the living room with the lights low, a glass of water on the coffee table, and nothing on the television. She appeared in the doorway, still in the burgundy dress, her expression already arranged into something practiced, concerned, slightly wounded, like she was the one who'd been wronged. "You just left," she said. "You showed me the door." I kept my voice level. I used it. Her jaw tightened. "That's not what I meant, Connor, and you know it. You were hovering. You were making it weird. I was standing next to my wife at a public event. You were sulking." She folded her arms, shifting her weight. "Reed is a business partner. This is my career. I can't have you trailing after me like you don't trust me." I looked at her for a long moment, really looked, and said nothing. Sometimes silence lands harder than anything you could say out loud. She filled it quickly, the way people do when the quiet makes them uncomfortable. "We can talk about this tomorrow," she announced, already moving toward the stairs. "I'm exhausted." "Good night, Jolene." She paused at the bottom of the stairs, as if she expected more. A fight, a plea, something to push against. When I gave her nothing, she went up. I sat there another hour, running the numbers in my head. Not emotional ones, financial ones. Over the past 4 months, I had noticed irregularities in 2 of our joint accounts. Transfers I didn't authorize, amounts that didn't line up with any household expense I could identify. I told myself it was probably vendor payments for the brand. Probably. I've been telling myself probably for too long. The next morning, after dropping Chloe at school, I drove across town to a part of Charlotte that doesn't show up on lifestyle blogs. A nondescript office above a tax prep storefront, 2nd floor, frosted glass on the door. Dale Hutchins had been a friend since our college days at NC State. Engineering school, same dorm, many late nights surviving differential equations together. After graduation, he'd gone a different direction entirely, building a quiet career in private investigation, mostly corporate work. Discretion was his product. I'd referred him 2 clients over the years without ever thinking I'd need him myself. He was at his desk when I walked in, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, coffee going cold beside his keyboard. He took one look at my face and pulled off the glasses entirely. "Talk to me," he said. So I did. I laid it out, the distance, the gala, the transfers, Reed Voss, all of it. Dale listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I'd always appreciated about him. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and tapped a pen slowly against his palm. "The financial piece worries me more than the personal piece," he said finally. "The personal piece I can confirm or deny in a week. The financial piece, if someone's been routing money deliberately, that takes longer and leaves more traces. I need to know both," I told him. He nodded once. "Give me 10 days. I left his office and drove back through the city, feeling the strange, hollow calm of a man who has finally stopped pretending. It wasn't peace. It was more like the moment before a storm when the birds go quiet and the air pressure drops. That evening, Jolene was already in performance mode. Smoothie bowl on the counter, phone wedged between ear and shoulder, laughing at something on a call that went quiet the instant I walked into the kitchen. She covered smoothly, "Let me call you back," and gave me a bright, untouched smile. "Good day," she asked. "Productive," I said, opening the fridge. Stuart Haynes called while I was making dinner. Stuart was my oldest business partner. We'd co-founded the company together, though he'd moved into a senior advisory role 3 years back while I handled day-to-day operations. We talked twice a week, easy rhythm, long history. Except tonight something was slightly off. His questions were a half-beat too casual, the kind of casual that's actually careful. He asked how things were going with the Raleigh expansion contracts. Asked if I'd been talking to any new investors lately. Asked, almost as an aside, whether Jolene and I had been looking at any restructuring of personal assets. I answered each question straight and gave him nothing extra. After we hung up, I stood at the stove with the spatula in my hand and felt something cold settle in the back of my mind. Stuart knew something, or someone had been asking him questions. Either way, whatever was happening around me was bigger than one bad night at a gala. I plated dinner, called Chloe down from her room, and sat across from my daughter while she told me about a girl at school who could do a cartwheel with her eyes closed. I laughed in the right places. I asked the right questions. But underneath all of it, the math was already running. Dale called me 9 days later. Not with a text, not an email, a call, which told me before he said a single word that what he'd found was worth saying out loud. We met at the same office. He had a folder on the desk when I walked in, closed, no dramatics. He waited until I sat down, then opened it and turned it to face me. Reed Voss has been in Paris twice in the last 4 months, Dale said. Both times, Jolene was there. Different flights, same hotel. I have receipts and photos. He tapped the next page. The financial transfers you flagged, 11 of them over 7 months, traced back to 2 LLCs registered in Delaware. Both filed within the last year. Both list a registered agent that connects, one layer removed, to a holding company Voss controls. I looked at the photos. Jolene and Reed at a cafe table. Close, easy, the body language of people who had long stopped being careful. I felt something move through my chest. Not rage, something quieter and more final, like a door closing on a room you've been leaving for a long time. There's more, Dale said. The LLCs aren't just holding money. They're incorporated under a brand name, Maison Vosfontaine. Luxury home goods. Product specs that overlap with your company's proprietary distribution framework. Someone gave him your operational playbook, Connor. That landed differently than the photos. The photos were personal. This was surgical. How long has the brand been in development? I asked. Best estimate, 18 months. 18 months. Jolene and I had celebrated our 10th anniversary 14 months ago. Weekend in Asheville, the inn with the fireplace, the long walk along the river where she told me she was grateful for everything we'd built. I closed the folder and slid it back across the desk. There's one more thing, Dale said, and his voice shifted just slightly. Careful now. I ran a background check on Voss as standard procedure. He's not single. He has a partner, a man named Felix Warden. They were together for 3 years, ran a joint consulting venture. Voss dissolved it 14 months ago, same time the brand development started. From what I can tell, Warden didn't see it coming. I sat with that for a moment. Does Warden know about Jolene? That, Dale said, is a question worth asking him. I drove home through Charlotte's midday traffic with the kind of focus that comes when anger gets cold enough to become strategy. That evening, Stuart Haynes called again. 4th time in 2 weeks, each call a little more pointed than the last. This time he asked directly whether I'd been approached about selling off the Raleigh contracts. I hadn't, but someone had clearly told him I might be open to it. I kept my voice easy and told him nothing had come across my desk. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my study and understood, fully, finally, that Stuart wasn't just making conversation. He was taking inventory, figuring out what was still mine before someone made a move on it. 2 betrayals. 1 marriage. 1 business. Both hollowed out from the inside while I'd been busy trusting people. I went upstairs and checked on Chloe. She was at her desk drawing horses, her tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth in concentration. She held up the drawing without looking away from it. What do you think, Daddy? That's the best horse I've ever seen. I told her honestly. She grinned. I'm gonna draw you one too. I sat on the edge of her bed and watched her work, and I let that be the only thing in the world for a few minutes. Just that small, certain room, and my daughter, and the scratch of her colored pencil on paper. Then I went back downstairs and started making calls. Roland Kress had an office in uptown Charlotte on the 22nd floor with a view that was clearly designed to remind you what losing felt like. Floor-to-ceiling glass, the city spread out below, the man himself behind a desk the size of a small aircraft carrier. He was 52, silver-haired, built like someone who'd been athletic once and stayed disciplined. His reputation was specific. He didn't take cases he couldn't win, and he hadn't lost a significant one in 11 years. His assistant had told me he had a 30-minute opening. He gave me 45, and by the end of it, He'd push aside 2 other files. I laid everything on the table. Dale's report, the financial transfers, the LLC registrations, the brand framework that mirror my company's proprietary systems, Stuart's suspicious behavior, the prenuptial agreement Jolene and I had signed before the wedding. Roland read in silence, turning pages with the unhurried attention of someone who already knew what he was looking for. When he finished, he set the folder down, steepled his fingers, and looked at me. "The prenup is solid," he said. "Violation of financial disclosure clause is clear. She moved marital assets without consent into entities designed to benefit a third party. That's not a gray area." He paused. "The business angle is actually more damaging to her position than the personal one. Courts don't like fraud. And this," he tapped the LLC page, "reads as fraud. What about Stuart Haynes?" Roland's expression didn't change. "If he's been providing inside information to your wife or her associate, that's a separate matter, civil, potentially criminal, depending on what we find. I'd recommend a forensic accountant on your business accounts within the week." I authorized it before I left his office. That afternoon, Felix Warden agreed to meet me. Dale had made the first contact, kept it clean, just that I was someone who'd been affected by the same situation and wanted to compare notes. Felix chose a coffee shop in Noda, corner table, arrived 5 minutes early. He was lean, quiet-eyed, the kind of man who'd learned to read rooms the hard way. He didn't waste time. "Voss dissolved our firm without warning," he said, wrapping both hands around his mug. 14 months ago. I put 4 years into that business." He told me the market had shifted. 2 weeks later, I found out he'd already incorporated the new brand, using half the client relationships we built together. "And you didn't go after him?" Felix's mouth tightened. I didn't have what I needed yet. He looked at me directly. "I'm guessing you do." I slid a copy of Dale's financial summary across the table. He read it without expression, then set it down with a quiet precision that felt like controlled fury. "He's been using your wife's brand reach and your operational infrastructure as the foundation," Felix said. "She thinks she's a partner. She's a vehicle. She doesn't know. Voss doesn't tell people things they'd object to." He leaned back. "I have records from our firm, original client lists, project frameworks he's repackaged under the new brand. Combined with what you have, it's enough to dismantle the whole structure." We talked for another hour. By the time we shook hands at the door, we had the outline of something I hadn't expected to find in the wreckage of my marriage. An alliance. That evening, Jolene was home early for once, moving through the kitchen with easy confidence, talking on the phone about a Milan content shoot. She smiled at me over the counter, warm, practiced, the full performance, and I smiled back without a flicker. She had no idea that Roland Kress had already drafted the first legal motion. She had no idea that Felix Warden had spent the afternoon handing me the rest of the map. And she had absolutely no idea that the forensic accountant was starting on Monday. I helped Chloe with her spelling homework after dinner, her small voice sounding out syllables at the kitchen table, while Jolene laughed softly in the next room on another call. I corrected Chloe's paper, told her she'd aced it, and meant it. One thing at a time. Jolene moved first. I'll give her that. She had good instinct for timing, even if her judgment about everything else had gone to ruin. It was a Tuesday morning, 3 days after I'd met with Felix Warden. Chloe was at school. I was in my home office reviewing the forensic accountant's preliminary notes when I heard Jolene's footsteps on the stairs. Unhurried, deliberate, the walk of someone who'd made a decision. She appeared in the doorway in workout clothes, phone in hand, and leaned against the frame. "I want to show you something," she said. She turned the phone screen toward me. It was her Instagram, pulled up to a post she'd published an hour earlier, while I'd been buried in spreadsheets. A photo of her at the gala, radiant, laughing, perfect, with a caption that made my stomach tighten on the first read. Lately I've been doing a lot of reflecting. When you pour everything into your work, your growth, your family, and the person who's supposed to be your partner responds with jealousy and silence, it's exhausting. I'm grateful for everyone who lifts me up. You know who you are. No names. Didn't need any. The comments were already stacking up. Hundreds of them. Her audience mobilizing like a small, devoted army. "You deserve better, Queen. He clearly can't handle a strong woman. Some men just can't grow." She was watching me read it, measuring my reaction. I set the phone down on the desk and looked at her. You turned our marriage into content. I share my truth, she replied, chin up. You fired a warning shot, I said evenly, and you dressed it up as vulnerability. That's not the same thing. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. She hadn't expected that particular read. People are allowed to support me, Connor. That's not an attack on you. No, I agreed. But it's the opening of a narrative. And we both know it. I leaned back in my chair. Here's what I want you to understand. I'm not going to fight you on social media. I'm not going to post anything, respond to anything, or give your audience a single frame to work with. That battlefield isn't interesting to me. She stared at me. The confidence in her posture shifted just a fraction. Not doubt exactly, more like recalibration. What battlefield is interesting to you? She asked carefully. I picked up the forensic accountant's preliminary notes and set them face down in the desk drawer. The kind with paperwork, I said simply. She left the room without another word. That afternoon, the post had 14,000 likes. Her DMs were flooded with support. 3 of my professional contacts texted me. Careful, awkward messages, checking in, not quite asking. The court of public opinion had been convened, and Jolene had made sure she got to give the opening statement. I called Roland Kress and told him about the post. Good, he said, with a satisfaction that surprised me. She's established a public record of her framing. When the financial misconduct evidence surfaces, the contrast will be significant. Judges are human beings. They read the room. That evening, Carolyn called. Jolene's mother, 67, sharp-tongued, with the particular skill of making concerns sound like indictment. I'd always managed her carefully, and she'd always known it. Connor, she said, her voice honeyed with false warmth. I heard things have been rocky. Jolene's under so much pressure. I hope you're not making this harder for her than it needs to be. Carol, I said, how's your hip been? Last time Jolene mentioned it. You've been putting off that procedure. A pause. It's been bothering me, actually. What? I'm glad you answered, I said. I'll be in touch soon. I ended the call before she could redirect. I had something specific in mind for Carol, but the timing wasn't right yet. I filed it away. Stuart called that same evening, 5th time in 3 weeks. This time his questions were sharper. Had I spoken to any attorneys? Was I planning any changes to the company structure? Had I talked to our insurance underwriter lately? Each question a probe. Each answer I gave him landing nowhere useful. After we hung up, I texted Dale. Stuart's escalating. Can you pull his financial activity? Anything linking him to Voss or the LLCs? Dale's reply came back in 4 minutes. Already running it. Give me 48 hours. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of Chloe's bed, while she showed me a book about marine animals she'd checked out from the school library. She read me 3 pages about octopuses with total authority, correcting her own pronunciation twice without prompting. I listened to every word like it was the most important thing I'd heard all week. Because honestly it was. The Piedmont Business Forum was the kind of event where Charlotte's power structure showed up to remind itself it existed. Developers, financiers, tech founders, a few local politicians who wore their ambitions like pocket squares. It happened every quarter at the Ballantine Hotel, and I'd attended reliably for 8 years. This quarter, I had a different reason for going. Arthur Weston had confirmed 2 days prior. 63 years old, silver-haired, the founder and former CEO of Weston Capital Group, a name that opened doors in 14 states and got mentioned in the same breath as Warren Buffett in certain Charlotte circles. He'd semi-retired to a board advisory role, but his presence at any event still shifted the center of gravity in the room. He'd reached out to me through a mutual contact after Felix Warden had quietly let it be known that Voss's new venture had burned an investor who knew Weston personally. The connection had taken 1 phone call to make, and exactly no convincing. Weston was already at the bar when I arrived, nursing a club soda, watching the room with the calm attention of a man who'd long since stopped needing to impress anyone. He shook my hand with a grip that meant business. I looked into your situation, he said, skipping pleasantries entirely. Voss approached 2 members of my investment network last year with a brand pitch. Used your company's distribution framework as the proof of concept for scalability. His voice was even, but his eyes were cold. He presented it as proprietary work his team had developed. My people passed, fortunately. But I don't forget. I'm not asking you to fight my battles. I told him. I know you're not, Weston said. I'm here because this affects my network's credibility and because I don't like watching a man get robbed in his own house. He swirled his soda. What do you need from me tonight? Your presence, I said. In one conversation, we moved through the room together, and I want to be clear about what that looked like because it mattered. Arthur Weston didn't need to announce himself. People came to him. Within 20 minutes of our arrival, 3 of Voss's current investors had found their way into our orbit, drawn by Weston's gravity. The conversations were polite, general, about market conditions and due diligence standards. But Weston had a way of raising a single precise question. Have you stress-tested the IP provenance on that venture? And watching it land like a stone in still water. Jolene arrived 40 minutes in, Reed Voss at her side, both of them glossy and confident. She saw me from across the room. Her expression registered surprise, then adjustment. She hadn't expected me here, hadn't expected Weston's hand on my shoulder, hadn't expected the particular quality of attention the room was giving our corner. I watched Reed Voss spot Weston. His smile didn't falter, but something behind it did. Later in the evening, I found myself near the entrance when Jolene approached alone, Voss momentarily occupied. She stopped in front of me, voice low. What are you doing with Weston? Catching up, I said. We have mutual interests. Her eyes searched my face. Connor, whatever you think you're doing. I'm attending a professional event, I said pleasantly. You told me the door was right there, Jolene. I used it. Turns out there were better rooms on the other side. Her jaw tightened. She opened her mouth, then closed it. A rarity. Across the room, I saw one of Voss's investors pull him aside, their body language shifting from social to serious. Voss's phone came out. The frown that crossed his face was small but real. I excused myself from Jolene without another word and returned to Weston, who handed me a club soda and said quietly, his funding conversation just got complicated. I nodded once. The next morning, I had Roland Kress file the first formal motion, prenup violation, financial misconduct, custody petition. And before Jolene saw a single document, I called a journalist at the Charlotte Business Observer I'd worked with twice before. I gave him nothing on the record, just enough on background to start asking the right questions about a new luxury brand and the provenance of its operational framework. The story ran 4 days later. Jolene read it over her morning coffee. I watched her face go still, the color pulling back, the performance dropping for just a moment, and then she looked at me across the kitchen table with something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not anger. Fear. The Charlotte Business Observer story ran on a Thursday morning, and by noon it had been picked up by 2 regional business wires. The headline was careful. Questions surround new luxury brands, IP origins, but the substance was precise. A new venture called Maison Voss Fontaine, launched quietly over the past 18 months, whose operational framework bore significant structural resemblance to proprietary systems developed by an established Charlotte logistics firm. Sources unnamed. Questions unanswered. Jolene called me 4 times before I finished my first cup of coffee. I let all 4 go to voicemail. She appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later, still in her robe, her phone in one hand and a fury in her eyes she wasn't bothering to contain. You did this, she said, her voice low and sharp. I looked up from my laptop. Good morning. Don't. She crossed the room and set her phone on the table in front of me, the article pulled up on the screen. You fed this to a journalist. You deliberately went behind my back to destroy something I spent 2 years building. You spent 2 years building it with my operational framework and my marital assets, I said evenly. Those are 2 things that belong to me. Her jaw tightened. You have no idea what Reed and I have a very detailed idea, I said. 14 pages of it. Actually, prepared by a forensic accountant. The color shifted in her face. Not all at once. It drained from the edges inward, the way a photograph fades when it's left in the light too long. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, which told me the confrontation had changed registers. She was no longer performing for an invisible audience. She was thinking. Connor. Her voice dropped. We can fix this. We can get in front of it, together. I'll cut ties with Reed, restructure the brand, put everything back in the joint accounts. We go to a real therapist, not that Beverly Hills circus. We work. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing my forearm. You and me. We were good once. We can be good again. I looked at her hand on my arm. Then I looked at her face, and I saw something genuine there, which made it harder, not easier. Jolene, I said quietly, I found the correspondence. The plan you and Reed built 18 months ago, before you came to Asheville with me for our anniversary, and told me you were grateful for everything we built. I paused. That wasn't a rough patch. That was a performance. Her hand withdrew. The softness left her eyes. Fine. Her voice hardened back into steel. You want to do this the hard way? Then think about what it does to Chloe. Think about what a public divorce does to her at school, to her friendships, to her sense of who her family is. Think about whether winning this fight is worth what it costs your daughter. She was watching me carefully, measuring whether it would land. I sat with it for exactly 3 seconds. Then I leaned forward, elbows on the table, and met her eyes without blinking. Don't use our daughter as a bargaining chip, I said. That's the one move that tells me everything I need to know about where you are right now. Chloe's welfare is why I've handled this the way I have, carefully, quietly, and legally. Everything I've done has been to protect her future, not yours or mine. I stood up slowly. Roland Kress filed the formal motions yesterday morning. You want to call your attorney? She stared at me. Her mouth opened once, closed. She hadn't expected that. Any of it. Not the calm, not the preparation, not the fact that I'd anticipated her emotional play and walked right through it without breaking stride. I picked up my laptop and my coffee and left the room. That evening, I drove to Carol Wren's house in Dilworth, a tidy colonial she'd owned for 20 years, hydrangeas along the front walk. She answered the door in her house dress, surprised and visibly wary. Connor, I wasn't expecting. I know, I said. May I come in? I sat across from her at the kitchen table and told her plainly. I knew about her hip replacement, that she'd been putting it off for 18 months because of the cost after her supplemental insurance lapsed. I slid an envelope across the table, a letter from my attorney confirming that the procedure would be fully covered through a private arrangement I'd made with her surgeon's office. No strings, no conditions. Carol looked at the envelope for a long time. Why? She asked finally. Because you're Chloe's grandmother, I said, and because whatever happens between Jolene and me, that doesn't change. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes went bright. She didn't offer to testify against her daughter. I hadn't asked her to. But 3 days later, Carol called Jolene, and whatever she said in that conversation, Jolene arrived home that evening quieter than I'd seen her in months. Some things don't need to be engineered. They just need to be honest. Reed Voss made his move on a Friday evening. The kind of move that looks decisive from the outside and feels from the inside, like panic wearing a good suit. Stuart Haynes called me at 6:15. Not a probe this time. His voice was different, lower, stripped of its usual managed ease. Connor, I need you to hear me out, he said. I'm listening. A long pause. I made a mistake. A significant one. Voss approached me 14 months ago, told me you were planning to sell the company, restructure, that he was working with Jolene on a transition plan. He needed insight into the Raleigh contracts and the distribution framework. He stopped. I thought I was protecting my position. I said nothing. I know that doesn't justify it, Stuart continued. I've already retained an attorney. I wanted you to hear it from me before the forensic report lands. It already landed, Stuart, I said. 3 days ago. The silence on his end was complete. I'll cooperate fully, he said finally. Whatever you need. I ended the call, set the phone on my desk, and stared at the middle distance for a moment. 11 years before that, Stuart and I had stayed up until 2 in the morning in a rented office on South Tryon Street, building the company's first client proposal on a whiteboard with a dried-out marker. I remembered arguing about the font on the cover page. I filed the memory away and moved on. 2 days later, Voss's world came apart with the kind of speed that only happens when multiple structural failures occur simultaneously. Felix Warden submitted his IP documentation package to 2 of Voss's primary investors, detailed, time-stamped, irrefutable. Within 48 hours, both investors had frozen their positions and retained independent counsel. By Tuesday morning, a third investor, one of the men Wesson had spoken with at the Piedmont Forum, had quietly pulled out entirely. Voss called Jolene repeatedly that week. She answered the first 2 times. After the third call, she stopped picking up. Then came the wire fraud flag. Dale had flagged it first. An attempted transfer of $340,000 from the Maison Voss-Fontaine operating account to an offshore entity registered in the Cayman Islands. The transfer had been initiated on a Sunday night. By Monday morning, the forensic accountant's report had already been in Roland Kress's hands, which meant that Voss's attempt to move money ahead of the legal proceedings was documented almost in real time. Federal investigators opened a preliminary inquiry by Wednesday. Voss's attorney issued a statement. Then Voss himself went silent. No posts, no calls, no appearances. Charlotte's social circuit registered his absence the way a body registers a removed splinter. A small relief, a slight soreness where it had been. I didn't watch any of it with satisfaction. I watched it the way you watch a controlled demolition, standing at a safe distance, confirming that the structure has come down where you calculated it would, making sure no one innocent is caught in the debris. The night the news broke publicly about the federal inquiry, Jolene came to me in the study. No performance this time, no strategy. She stood in the doorway and looked at me with something that was close to the woman I'd married. Tired, unguarded, stripped of the gloss. I didn't know about the offshore account, she said. I believe you, I told her. She blinked, as if she hadn't expected that either. It doesn't change what you did know about, I added. But I believe you on that specific point. She nodded once, slowly, and left the room. Upstairs, Chloe was asleep with her stuffed elephant under one arm and a library book about dolphins open on the pillow beside her. I closed the book gently, tucked the blanket around her shoulders, and stood there in the quiet of her room for a long time. Roland Kress called in the morning. The custody hearing was set. Everything was in place. The courtroom in the Mecklenburg County Courthouse was smaller than I'd expected for something that had occupied so much of my life over the past several months. Wood paneling, fluorescent overhead light, the faint smell of recycled air and old paper. Roland Kress sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, his suit pressed to a geometric precision, a yellow legal pad in front of him with 3 lines of notes that I suspected were largely decorative. He didn't need notes. He had the whole thing organized in his head. Across the aisle, Jolene's legal team, 2 attorneys from a prominent Charlotte firm, had arranged a significant volume of paperwork in a way that communicated industry without quite conveying confidence. Jolene sat between them in a charcoal dress, hair pulled back, composed in the way of someone who has rehearsed composure rather than felt it. She didn't look at me when I sat down. Her mother, Carol, was seated in the gallery. She told Jolene she was coming for support. She hadn't specified whose. The proceedings took the better part of 2 days. Jolene's team led with the standard framing. Devoted mother, ambitious professional, a woman whose husband had grown distant and resentful as her success outpaced his comfort. They brought in a character witness, one of her brand collaborators, who testified about Jolene's warmth and dedication with the smooth reliability of someone who'd been well briefed. Roland let them finish. Then he opened his binder. The financial misconduct evidence was presented methodically. 11 transfers, 2 Delaware LLCs, the direct link to Voss's holding company, the forensic accountant's timeline showing that the transfers began 22 months prior, 4 months before our 10th anniversary in Asheville. The prenup violation wasn't argued. It was demonstrated, page by page, figure by figure. Then came the business fraud component. Roland introduced Felix Warden's IP documentation alongside the Maison Voss-Fontaine Incorporation filings, showing the overlap between my company's proprietary distribution framework and the new brand's operational structure. He presented Arthur Weston's written statement, 3 paragraphs, precise and damning, confirming that Voss had pitched Weston Capital's network using frameworks he'd represented as original proprietary work. Jolene's attorneys objected 4 times. The judge sustained none of them. Stuart Haynes had submitted a written cooperation statement the previous week. It was entered into the record. Jolene, hearing her name linked explicitly to the scheme through Stuart's account, pressed her lips together so tightly they went white at the edges. The custody component was quieter but decisive. Chloe's school counselor testified about Chloe's emotional stability and her strong, consistent attachment to her father. My documented presence, school pickups, medical appointments, parent-teacher conferences, was entered as a complete record going back 3 years. Jolene's absences, cataloged without editorializing, spoke for themselves. When the judge delivered her ruling on the second afternoon, the courtroom was very still. Full physical custody to Connor Fontaine. Supervised visitation for Jolene Fontaine. with a review hearing in 9 months contingent on demonstrated stability. The marital estate to be divided in accordance with prenuptial terms, with additional financial penalties applied for documented misconduct. The business fraud component referred to the appropriate civil authorities. Roland capped his pen and gathered his papers without celebration. I sat very still for a moment, letting the ruling settle. No fist pump, no exhale of triumph. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something enormous had concluded, and that what came next was going to matter more than what had just ended. In the hallway afterward, Carol Wren caught up with me near the elevator. She looked older than she had at her kitchen table 2 weeks ago, or maybe just more honest. "You're a good father," she said simply. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were tired. "Whatever else, you've always been that." I thanked her and meant it. Jolene was escorted out through a side corridor, her attorneys flanking her. I caught one glimpse of her face before the door closed. The mask was gone, and what was underneath looked like someone standing in the ruins of a plan that had been years in the making and minutes in the unraveling. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something closer to sorrow, not for myself, but for the waste of it all. Reed Voss, by that point, had surrendered his passport voluntarily as a condition of the federal inquiry's terms. The preliminary wire fraud investigation had expanded in scope. His attorneys were managing an increasingly complicated situation, and Charlotte's business community had developed a collective amnesia about ever having thought highly of him. I drove to Chloe's school and picked her up myself, early, with permission from the front office. She came running out in her jacket with her backpack bouncing and a drawing in her hand. "Daddy, I made a horse for you today. A brown one." I crouched down and took the drawing, looked at it with the full attention it deserved. "That," I said, "is the finest horse in North Carolina." She threw her arms around my neck, and I held on. 8 weeks after the ruling, I bought back the rights to the Maison Vossfontaine brand name through the bankruptcy proceedings that followed the collapse of Voss's holding company. The brand had been incorporated using my framework. It seemed only right that it should dissolve under my authority. I didn't repurpose it. I closed it, filed the paperwork on a Tuesday afternoon, shook hands with the bankruptcy trustee, and drove home. Felix Warden and I had been meeting regularly since the proceedings concluded. What had begun as a shared grievance had become, quietly and practically, something worth building on. Felix had genuine expertise in brand development and client strategy. I had infrastructure and capital and, as it turned out, a logistics company with room to grow in new directions. We signed a formal partnership agreement on a Friday morning in Roland Kress's conference room, Roland witnessing with his characteristic expression of a man who finds competence mildly satisfying. The Haynes situation resolved through civil arbitration. Stewart agreed to a financial settlement covering the value of the proprietary information disclosed, plus legal costs. He resigned from his advisory role the same week. We didn't speak again after the settlement was signed. That chapter closed without ceremony, which was the right way for it to close. Jolene moved to a condo in South End. Her Instagram went quiet for nearly 3 weeks after the ruling, an eternity for a woman whose professional identity was built on continuous presence. When she did return, the content was different, smaller, more personal. Whether that was genuine recalibration or a new strategy, I couldn't say. I stopped trying to read it either way. Carol Wren had her hip procedure in late November. Chloe and I sent her flowers and a card that Chloe had decorated with horses and stars. Carol called to thank us, and we talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Chloe's school play, a recipe Carol wanted to try, whether the hydrangeas would come back strong in spring. The kind of conversation that doesn't mean anything significant and means everything real. The visitation arrangement was uncomfortable at first, for Jolene, for Chloe, and yes, for me, watching my daughter try to navigate the new geography of her family. But Chloe was resilient in the way children are when they have one steady parent to orient around. She adapted. She asked her questions when she had them, let them go when they were answered, and kept drawing her horses. I never spoke badly of Jolene to Chloe. Not once. Whatever Jolene had done to our marriage, she was still this child's mother, and I wasn't going to let my daughter carry that weight. One Saturday in December, Chloe and I drove out to a farm east of Charlotte. Her idea, following months of research she'd done with the single-minded determination of an 8-year-old with a clear objective. She spent 3 hours with a patient mare named June, learning to brush her down and feed her carrots from a flat palm. On the drive back, Chloe fell asleep in the back seat with her head against the window and a small smile still on her face. I drove through the last of the Carolina afternoon light, the road easy and open ahead, and thought about the man I'd been 18 months ago, waiting, enduring, telling himself that patience was the same thing as strength. It isn't. I know that now. Patience without honesty is just a slower way to disappear. What I had now wasn't a perfect life. It was something more durable than that, a real one, built on ground that had been cleared honestly, however hard the clearing had been. Chloe stirred as we pulled into the driveway, blinking. "Daddy," she murmured, still half asleep. "Can we go back to see June?" "Whenever you want, sweetheart," I told her. She smiled, closed her eyes again. That was the whole of it, right there. That smile, that easy answer, that ordinary grace. Not every rebuilding looks dramatic from the outside. Some of the most important construction happens in the quiet, in the small consistent things, in the choice to show up without conditions. I carried her inside, tucked her in, stood in her doorway for a moment in the dark. Then I went downstairs, made coffee, and got back to work.